Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on your time zone. I just want to apologize right away. My camera is not working, so I cannot see anyone, and I cannot even see the presentation, so I will moderate this session totally blind. So I apologize if I do some mistake already. My name is Philippe Archambault. I'm a professor in oceanography at Laval University. I'm also the co-scientific director of ArcticNet. ArcticNet is a network of Center of Excellence of Canada that exists since 15 years that brings scientists, engineers, and managers in the human health and social science with their partner from Inuit organizations, northern communities, federal and provincial agencies to study the impact of climate change in the Canadian North. The Arctic is experiencing a change at an unprecedented pace. As an example, we got the second lowest ice shelf extent in 2020, just after 2012. The panel will be focused on climate change and pollution in the Arctic, how both affect resources in the Arctic and biodiversity, and also how this affects community safety and security. The goal will be to look at solutions to address these challenges. But before starting to let the panelists have their presentation, I will have just a small housekeeping. I would like to take a brief moment to explain how to engage with a panel. On the lower right-hand corner of the screen in the WebEx application, you should see a QA function. To open it, you need to click on the sideways arrow next to the word QA. This should open a dialog box which will allow you to type in a question and send it to the panel. For those of you watching us on the IPF YouTube channel, if you have questions, you can send them to afs-qa@polarfoundation.org, and we will forward them to me or the speakers. We will do our best to answer your question, but if we get too many, please forgive us. We cannot answer all of them. If you would like to continue the conversation on topic brought up during the panel, and I hope so, after we finish, you are welcome to do so on the Slack space that has been set up for the symposium. The link to join the Slack space was sent in the invitation you received by email to join today's webinar. And we will post it again in the Q&A section in the corner right at the end of this session. Each panel session has its own channel. So here today on this session, the pollution, climate change, and biodiversity challenges and solution, we got 5 panelists. The first panelist is Dr. Kjersti Tønnessen Busch. Please, next slide. Thank you. So I was mentioning the first panelist is Dr. Kjersti Tønnessen Busch. The second one, they are going to have 2 panelists together doing this second presentation. Is Lisanne Raderschall and André Sanabria. The third panelist will be Hjálmar, and the last panelist will be Avar. So without more time, I would like to introduce Dr. Kjersti Busch. She's one of the founders. Stay on the previous slide, please. Dr. Busch is one of the founders of the CEO of SALT. Today, the company has more than 20 highly educated staff working from offices in the Lofoten Island in northern Norway and in small offices in other Norwegian regions. Realizing that great opportunities in the Arctic region with an emphasis on the marine environment is SALT's core mission. Marine litter is posing challenges to coastal communities in the Arctic. SALT is working actively to monitor marine litter and to prevent littering from land-based and sea-based resources. One of the great motivators for Kjersti is to create knowledge-based jobs in the Arctic region, preferably in the coastal community. So I will let you, Kjersti, do your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Introduction. I hope that you see this presentation. I'm going to talk about marine litter in the Arctic, and I'll be talking about macro litter and most of all about litter from the fishing industry. And the reason for that is that most of the litter that we find in the Arctic, or 2/3 of what we find in the Norwegian Arctic, come from the fishing industry. And that makes it really important to work with fishermen and the fishing industry to reduce the negative impact of their activities. Just briefly about the company Salt. We're now 21 staff. We're living in different places of Norway, and I myself am sitting in Svolvær in the Lofoten Islands. And we're also planning these days to establish a new office in Båtsfjord in Finnmark County, which is at the northernmost tip of Norway. We work in 3 different areas. We work with marine management, coastal societies, and marine litter. We're very concerned about trying to estimate the quantities of beach litter, because what we find from citizen science is that the data from citizen science is biased towards the beaches where we find high amounts of litter. Citizen science naturally go to the places where they see litter and they collect litter from these beaches, the hotspots. But we tried to find good estimates of the total quantity of litter on Norwegian beaches and other beaches. And we've developed a method that we call the MAP method, which simply means that we go to randomly selected coastlines and we select transects out of different squares where we collect the number and the weight of the litter that we find. So at each beach where we register litter in blocks of 10 by 10 meters. And we've done this now in a huge number of beaches in Norway and also in the Russian Arctic. And this data set is open to people that are interested. So if you're interested in this data set, you're more than welcome to contact me by email. What we find is that there's a huge variation among beaches and even within beaches. So it is difficult to give good estimates of the quantities of litter. But our preliminary and unpublished findings shows us that there's an increase in the amounts of litter as we move northwards. So when we come to the Barents Sea in the Finnmark County, we find 2.8 kilos per meter beach line, while the amounts in the southern part of Norway is much lower. We're also very interested in looking at the sources of marine litter in the Arctic. Based on our own data, we find that a lot of the litter that we find come from fishery-based sources. And if we look at the entire country, we estimate that there's more than 100 million objects on Norwegian beaches that comes from the fishing industry, and that there's more than 10,000 tons of litter from this industry on beaches today. We've also looked at citizen science data from the Lofoten Islands, and we look at the items that we find most commonly. And we see that a lot of these items are likely to come from the fishing industry. So rope and pieces of rope is a very common item. Polystyrene or EPS is also very common. The same with beverage bottles, lids and caps, and also buoys and floats. So we know that there are large amounts of litter in the Arctic. We know that it comes to a large extent from the fishing industry. So how can we combat litter in the Arctic? We do believe in preventive measures, and we think that the most important thing we can do is to stop littering. So we've developed courses for young fishermen at all schools in Norway that educate fishermen. It's a program where we've made films and exercises to the students. And even the Norwegian Crown Prince, Kronprins Haakon, is part of the video where he is talking to the students and talking about the importance of preventing littering. There's also a very high number of cleanup actions in Norway. In 2019, there were 43,000 volunteers cleaning up beaches in Norway. And we believe that cleaning up beaches is the best way of cleaning litter from the ocean. While we're skeptical towards new technology that wants to clean up floating litter, because that might do more harm than good. But cleaning beaches is a way of removing litter that would otherwise end up or go back to the ocean. We've also seen, by studying data from cleanup actions in the Lofoten Islands, that the amount of marine litter in the Lofoten Islands have decreased from 2011 till 2018. And we see a general decline in this region, and this decline is probably a combined result of extensive cleanup activities and also a considerable reduction in local litter inputs, which is a really good news. There's also initiatives in Norway to start professional cleanup actions. This is financed by the Norwegian Retailers Fund and regional authorities. And their goal is to clean up 40% of the exposed coastline of Norway. So this professional cleanup, it has started in different counties in Norway, and it's rolled out to all counties of Norway. Salt is also responsible for the fishing for litter in Norway, where large fishing vessels and small fishing vessels deliver the litter that they get through their normal fisheries activities. And they're allowed to deliver this litter free of charge in different harbors. And through this Fishing for Litter scheme, we've received 218 tons of litter in 2019. This is not only cleaning up the ocean and the ocean floor, but it's also probably one of the best preventive measures that we know of. We think that fishermen that are engaged in fishing for litter will not litter themselves. And we've done what we call the Great Cleanup Action in 2020. We believe that this is the largest single cleanup action ever performed anywhere. We cleaned up a beach with an estimated amount of 50 tons of litter in a 1 kilometer beach stretch in Finnmark. We invited soldiers from a troop of soldiers of 50 people that stayed 1 week at this beach, and they collected 340 big bags of litter during this week. So here you see one of the 3 different collections of big bags collected through this week. And the reason why we do all this is that we want to prevent this sort of pictures. This is a picture of 5 razor bills that we found through this great cleanup action. Quite fresh. It comes from a net that was probably came to shore only a few days before we found them. And this is exactly the reason why we need to work against marine litter and to make sure that we reduce the amounts that is left in the ocean, and also clean up the litter that we find. And I'd be very happy to get in touch with all of you that are listening. So please don't hesitate to contact me afterwards if you're interested in what was presented. And I'll also be happy to answer questions later this session. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for this presentation. And I just want to say that your sampling design is just impressive. And your number of volunteers, it's even more, 43,000. I would say this is an Herculean cleanup, and congratulations for that. I just have a one question. I don't see any question at that time. So please, the people listening, the attendee, don't hesitate to send some question. But do you think there is also some willingness from the fishermen to use some biodegradable, any kind of material for their fishing gear?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're actually involved in a new project, an 8-year project, together with the University of Tromsø and other organizations, where we're going to look at biodegradable fishing gear. And both fishermen and fish gear producers are involved in this project. So I think there is a will to test this. But what we see for now is that the biodegradable fishing gear that we know of, they give smaller catches of fish than regular gear. And I think that's one of the main challenges that needs to be solved if this is to be part of the future.
Good. That's a really great avenue. Thank you for this. We're going to move to the next panelist. Everyone, if you have some more questions, keep them for the end. We hope we will going to have a few 15 minutes at the end to take some more questions. So again, thank you very much for this nice presentation. And again, very impressive sampling design. I'm doing a statistical course, and I would love to have this kind of design. Thank you. So the next two presenter is Lisanne. Lisanne is a policy analyst in the Regional Development and Tourist Division of the Center for Entrepreneurship for Small Medium Enterprise, Region and Cities of the OECD. Since joining the OECD in 2016, Lisanne has prepared advice to national and sub-national government on rural and regional policies. She has conducted several reviews on multi-level governance system for place-based policymaking, local policymaking for migrant and indigenous people, as well as climate change-related challenges and opportunities in rural areas. Her work aims to strengthen and support the well-being of inhabitants in all types of region, reinforce their resilience in a fast-changing world, and reduce inequalities. She will present also with Andres Sanabria. Andres has worked in regional and rural development issues at the OECD for around 4 years. He has conducted various OECD case studies on mining region, notably North Karelia in Finland, Upper Norrland in Sweden, and Andalusia in Spain. His participation in these studies focus on policies and government arrangements to promote economic diversification, rural entrepreneurship, and using innovation to accelerate the low-carbon economy transition in a mining context. He also collaborated in the development of the new OECD framework of rural policy by designing the strategies to boost rural productivity, the guideline for rural policy implementation, and the vision of the rural area of the future. So I'll let you do your presentation.
Well, so thank you for having us. Please let me know if the presentation, I think, is right now on your screen. Well, probably the question why two people acting in one speaker slot is because we want to present a case study that is still unpublished that we did on Upper Norrland in the north of Sweden. It's a case study that Lisanne and myself developed. So very quickly, the idea of the presentation is to give you the framework of the OECD on regional development and rural development in a mining context, and why it's important for the energy transition, and then probably present some key points from this case study that are quite interesting for the Arctic discussions. The OECD, for those who don't know, is the forum of right now 37 developed countries. Well, it's a house of best practices and good policies that works across different areas. We have a particular initiative on mining regions and cities. The main idea is to to try to help regions and small rural municipalities specialize on mining and extractive industries to improve the development strategy, to try to diversify the economy and the well-being, of course, for the citizens, and especially this part of accelerate the climate neutrality and use all the strength that they have in-house to make that happen. We have three main, in this initiative, main three goals. One is developing a global toolbox of recommendations and evidence. So it's something that we are this year, 2021, trying to finish. We also produce a number of case studies. They are specifically to advise governments on particular areas. So probably Lisanne, we're going to tell you more about the case study on the north of Sweden. And we're finally also developing a global platform for discussion and for exchange of best practices. We do that through mining conferences once a year. Why we work on mining? Well, it's quite a relevant topic for many regions, and well, even if some don't like mining, it's a crucial source of income for local communities. No, it's that represents high wages in some areas. Also leads to innovation and helps the development of new technologies. Also brings investment for infrastructure and services for these local communities. And well, if well managed, also can contribute to the growth of small companies and providers. That probably we are going to see something of this on this case study. Of course, this sector and this kind of activities, they have some drawbacks. So there are some environmental and social impacts. There is also income volatility at the regional level, also because following the price of commodities. And in some cases, the high productivity and the high income as such is not evenly distributed with the local community. So the benefits sometimes tend to stay in some few hands. So the idea is to make the most of this, and as you see probably in this next slide, for Arctic regions and other OECD regions, mining is a main source of income. Here I present the regional specialization index. Is more or less overall how the share of employment in mining activities in the region as a comparison with the share of employment of mining in the country. So we see that all the regions that are above 1 is because they have more people working in mining than the country. So here we have key actors on the Arctic. We have Northern Territories, Nunavut from Canada, Alaska, Norrbotten, Sweden, Yukon, Canada also, and our regions that we have been working also with in Kainuu and Lapland in Finland, and Västerbotten. So just to say that, well, it's an important sector. So and these regions also rely on this for living, no? And I think that is the main subject of this presentation is, well, if we have these incomes happening at the local level, we have these people working on these activities and a business environment around it. How we make this activity the most sustainable possible, and how we ensure that the benefits stay locally. So we conducted together with the governments of Västerbotten and Norrbotten, that are the two regions of Upper Northland. We conducted a case study that lasted almost 1 year and a half. The report is going to be published in January. Why? Because these regions, especially Upper Holland, that is the region that aggregates these two small regions, Västerbotten and Norrbotten, is a key player in Europe for mining activities. Represents the 90% of iron ore that Europe produces, and also in Sweden, well, concentrates 9 of the 12 active mines. We have from these regions important global players in mining. We have LKB and Boliden, that are 2 companies that are globally known but are locally placed in these regions. And also we have a series of new demands, as probably as most of you know, from the European Union on this strategic vision to increase self-sufficiency on minerals, with the aim to support the transition to a low carbon economy and to build green technology. So I think there is a lot of stake and a lot of play at hand here with the potential of mining from some European regions. So the idea is how to make these activities align with the regional development. I think Lisanne is going to now tell you a bit more about the case study and the policy recommendations that we ended up proposing to AFS. So, well, in the framework of the case study, we identified some opportunities and challenges for these regions. Well, first, in terms of opportunities, as I mentioned, well, they have a very active mining business ecosystem that runs with high environmental standards, and some of these companies, especially the big ones, LKB and Boliden, they are at the frontier of research and technological progress. Why? Because they work very closely with universities, with Luleå University. And it's interesting because most of these technologies and research is focused on the carbonization of the mining value chain. So they have developed some technologies and processes to reduce the consumption of water, but also reduce the CO2 emissions from the iron process and refinery. And I think we are going to discuss more about it, but now we knew that last week LKB launched an important initiative on this technology. So I think it's going to be make some noise on the effects for the climate goals of Sweden and probably the regions. Other opportunity that we detected was also the highly skilled labor force. So just to say, and here is important that these Arctic regions, they stand out, not only the Swedish ones, but also in Finland and Canada, by the skill of labor force. So that is important to highlight. That is a big potential to use and to leverage on this labor force to create new businesses and innovate. No. Also important, the region runs mostly through green energy, renewable energy, wind farms and hydro. So in terms of the sustainability of the production, the standard is quite high. And also importantly, the broadband coverage is one of the highest in Europe and one of the highest across the OECD in both regions. This, I think, is important to highlight that broadband coverage, and especially for rural regions and for remote rural regions in the Arctic or in other places, is becoming more a need than a nice thing to have. So when we went to these mines, some of these mines, they run with autonomous trucks, and they have autonomous lighting also. So in terms of reducing the environmental impact of the production, I think it's quite a game changer to be at the front of broadband connections. We're also discussing the relevance of using new innovations like the decentralized 3D printing production for some processes, to also avoid the shipping of material in plane or by boat. And some of the challenges, well, is the low interaction of this innovative environment with the municipalities and small businesses. The aging issue, because there are some regions that are facing the workforce. Yeah. Philippe?
Nope, that's fine.
Okay.
Just try to start to wrap up, please.
Yeah, and the regulatory framework also has some issues with the complex multi-layer framework with the land use. Just to give you some recommendations, I don't know if Lisanne, you are connected, or you want me to go ahead?
Yes, go for the recommendation. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Okay, so the recommendations define a long-term vision. Well, the idea of the recommendation was, and the final recommendation was how to make Upper Norland, that is this region, the lead player in the world on sustainable mining. So this series of recommendations are aiming towards that goal. Here there are some selected recommendations. One is defining a long-term vision to support environmentally sustainable mining practices. This seems a bit obvious, but we see that politically, at the political level, sometimes it's hard to take the flag of supporting mining in an environment or in a global context that has a lot of opposition from the public side. So that is a first important action. Strengthening also the integration of these municipal governments and with the universities and the innovation process of the big firms is something that can boost also the local business environment. And has entrepreneurship. We see also that the entrepreneurship culture in mining regions, not only in this region but in general, is a bit low, because providers, they get used to work with the mining company, and it's hard to go away from this locking provider system. Also strengthening a brand for people to know that this is the trademark of sustainable mining. And these three last recommendations that are very related with the land use is adopt some instruments to improve the regulatory framework. We have issues with the delays in permitting, or at least deciding if the project is good or bad. In some regions that takes too much time, and that is not good neither for the mining company and not for other activities, because this part of land is taken like a hostage. So that is important also for other regions. I think it's very relevant. And strengthening the incorporation of cumulative impacts in the decision making of mining ventures, not just looks at the environmental impact, but also the social and the economic impact. And with the indigenous, with the Sami villages, we developed some recommendations, but I just probably will mention the one that is developing a clear and consistent consultation between mining industry and this population with an effective coordination of land use. I think that's it. I think if you have some questions, we can really in the Q&A, and if Lisanne wants to join also to participate.
Thank you very much, Andres. We have the time for a really short question, and I just want to know, how do you take into account the indigenous land right or input in your approach or in the report?
Okay, she doesn't. I think she has some issues with the connection. So I'm gonna answer that question. Yes, so in the project we did 2 missions and we interviewed different players. So we met with the Sami Council and some Sami communities, and so we took that is the way of taking their vision. There are some. I think that these communities they have like experience cohabitation with mining since some time ago. So I would say that in terms of cohabitation is not as bad as in other regions, probably in Latin America. But there are some issues with the land use regulation that is probably making relations a bit hard because there is a lack of clarity of what is who takes the decision over a land piece is going to be posted for mining ventures or for herdering pro or for tourism. I think that decision process was not as clear, so the recommendations were into that part. But also, well, yeah, if you want, but also I think this also important is how because I think they realize that they need an vibrant economy to keep their businesses, because but it's not just they have some issues with the tourism also, but they also trade with the local communities in terms of the products that they sell. So I think it's also how to improve that relationship with the community.
Thank you very much, Andres, for this answer. We need to move to the next panelist. Hjálmar holds a PhD from the University of Bergen. He is a senior research scientist at the Faroe Marine Research Institute and a lecturer at the University of Faroe Island. His research focuses on the large-scale oceanic circulation in the subpolar North Atlantic and its impact on marine ecosystem. He brings in large-scale indices like the Gyre Index to collectively discuss key trends in several components of this vast pelagic and unknown complex world. Thank you. So, Hjálmar, if you can share. Thank you.
Yes, I'm about to do that. Do you see my screen?
Yes, we see your screen.
And, do you see my PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
So to something completely different. Let's get this one out of sight. Yes. I'll not talk about climate change, but climate variability, and not the high Arctic, but the subarctic. Some people say that we here in the Faroes or in the subpolar North Atlantic are living in a big climate oasis. As you see, we certainly have sea temperatures over 5 degrees, yellowish colors, which is higher than anywhere else in the world at the same latitude, both in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. And as many of us know, this is due to ocean currents, the Gulf Stream and its continuation as the North Atlantic current, and moist, relatively warm winds. They each carry about 300,000 billion watt of energy. So huge amounts. This concept, called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, AMOC, has often recently been used to discuss these things. It's a buzzword. It is good, but should not be selling too much because of the notion there. These strong winds here, they cool water south of Greenland, and the cool water becomes dense. It sinks down, and it mixes deep down in waters called winter convection. This convection brings up nutrients, so it fertilizes these waters. And when the sun is coming high in the springtime, enough sun, enough nutrients leads to large primary production of algae. I've shown this image here, average image of net primary production. Yellowish and reddish colors show high values. And you see that the North Atlantic is unique in the world oceans. It's a very productive ocean. So as I say, or we say that nothing is so bad, we have really bad weather that is not good for something. It boosts the ecosystems, biological production. So these cold winds cause convection in the Labrador Sea, fill up this subpolar gyre with cold and low saline subarctic waters. And that actually blocks the Gulf Stream from continuing straight to the high Arctic. So these warm waters, they have to sneak by the subpolar gyre. When the subpolar gyre is strong, as shown here, then conditions here in Faroese waters are cold and low salinity. But this gyre can also weaken suddenly, opening up this window and allowing this subtropical waters, warm and saline, to sneak by. So a strong gyre, cold and fresh, on the weekends becomes warmer and more saline. Some years back, we came up with a gyre index to reflect this variability, shown here with the black dashed line. And a strong gyre is downwards, so in the early 90s, the gyre was really strong. It is here compared to salinity, and salinity is a conservative tracer of water masses, tells us where the water masses are coming from. And we see that go up and down, decadal scale variability and longer term changes. For example, when the gyre was strong in the early 90s, the salinity was really low. Just a few years after, the gyre weakened and we got record high temperature and salinities. This gyre index is just one of several indices in the North Atlantic. We also have what they call Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation, AMO. So long-term variability is based on sea surface temperature. The black one is the sea surface temperature west of the British Isles. And that influences the climate in Europe. For example, here we have the central England temperature, shows this type of variability and also an increase. And the most famous atmospheric index is called the North Atlantic Oscillation, NAO, shorter scales. And underneath all this natural variability, we of course have the impact of a long-term trend associated with climate change or global warming. To see more in detail in space what happens, in the early 90s, when it was cold, the subpolar gyre really protruded its cold and fresh limbs towards Europe, while a few years afterwards, when it was warm, it retracted westwards, opening up this window, and we experienced a complete exchange of water masses here south of Iceland. And that does not just impact temperatures and salinities, it is the nutrients and all types of algae and the biota. So profound bottom-up impact on ecosystems. This is a bit out-of-date study, but we now know that after 2015, this gyre actually became stronger again. So it's more like the situation in the left panel here. What I've done the last 50 years is to study how this mixing of cold and warm waters influences the ecosystem all the way from nutrients, phytoplankton, zooplankton, planktivorous large fish. This prey species sand eel, the codstock around the Faroes, preys on sand eel and also seabirds, and all the way up to pilot whales and more. I planned on showing you an example for blue whiting, but I skipped that for time right now. So I will just go to a recap in the biogeographical terms. We can say that we have a really rich boreal zone, this green one here. And to the west and north, we have the Arctic biome. It's fewer species, but large stocks of biota. We get the influence from the Lusitanian biome from the Biodiversity region, and we get also contribution from the North Atlantic drift from the Gulf Stream. And in the midst of all this complex, we have this flywheel of the subpolar gyre, which can become larger, and that's the periods when temperatures are going down, like up to the mid-90s, and also actually from the late 1800s up to the 20s. And this gyre can suddenly weaken, and that's when where it allows these faunistic or biomes to expand, and that's when the temperatures are rising. Recently, predictability is a hot topic. And it has been shown that if anything in the world oceans is predictable, it is exactly this region. And ongoing research right now, and also very much discussed in the decade of ocean science that's about to start, to see if this predictability actually reaches into the high Arctic. So that's also where my personal research is focusing on right now. And to understand that, you need to understand the returning polar and the subarctic waters that come back south again from the high Arctic. And this feature called the Norwegian gyre, which, just like its larger sibling, subpolar gyre, mixes water masses, is important for the Atlantic inflow towards the Arctic, and also for the biological production and the ecosystems in the Nordic seas. So maybe just to end off, maybe a little provocation, you could say, this image went viral in the world press or media a few years back. It's a warm world. It was warmer than ever, but we had this cold blob. And because this resembles the long-term projection standard models 100 years forward in time, some researchers said, oh, this is indication that the AMOC, the overturning circulation, is weakening. And that was sellable stuff. I'll say it's probably not due to a weakening of the AMOC. It is due to an intensified subpolar gyre. Yeah. At that time, we said that this is probably good for shelf ecosystems and that the projection seems to hold. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hjálmar. I love really this last slide, and because where I live, it showed that it's colder also in Quebec. You mentioned there's a change in species distribution, and it's clear, but is there also some impact on the fisheries, on the abundance, or even the species? Is there a shift in species in the fisheries, or it's only a change in abundance of these fisheries?
Both. I could just show example of blue whiting. It's a very important fish stock. We see here sea surface temperature, and we see in the mid-90s that, for example, the stock of blue whiting increased a lot. It became the largest fishery almost in the world. At that time, it declined again. So it impacts both the biomass, the stock size of fish, and also during this period when it was cold in the early 90s, this is catches by all nations. And you see that in the early 90s, when it was cold, the fish was limited to the European margin. But afterwards, when it became warmer, for example, this species really expanded its spawning distribution a lot, and also its post-spawning migration direction. So we had a huge impact on the blue whiting stock, the fishery, and also on mackerel and herring and so on.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much. I look at the time. We're going to move to the next, and not the least, presenter. Thank you very much again, Hjálmar. So the last panelist is Dr. Hélène Avar. Her background is in environmental study and geographical science, specifically in northern community development and food security. She is the director of the Nunavik Research Center, which is an Inuit organization created in 1978 to monitor and collect land use and ecological data in Nunavik, the Inuit region of northern Quebec in Canada. Work carried out at the Nunavik Research Center involves conducting scientific research on wildlife, country food, and the natural environment. So the floor is yours, Hélène. During that time, then she joined. I have another question for you, Hjálmar. So you use the word climate variability, and I seen also the word climate disorder. Which one will you prefer to use?
I've never heard that before, actually, climate disorder, but it sounds kind of a negative way. I would say climate variability, and that's what I use.
Yeah, I will prefer too, but I've seen it in a paper, so I just want to have some other opinion on that, because I think it was a little bit a strong word, disorder, than there's a negative aspect to that. So I
agree. And then it's just disorder, you get this sense of chaos and so on, and of course it's very complex and chaotic, but there's also some meaning to it and a signal in it. So I would say let's stick to variability.
I fully agree with you. Just, yeah. Is there some other question for the panelists at this stage? So maybe Kjersti, I know they're got a question for you. If you don't mind, I know you answer in the chat area, but for the other attendees. So the question was, does you get government support other than support by the army for your litter cleaning up? So if you want to answer to everyone, every attendee, that will be great if they didn't see the chat discussion.
Yeah, I thanks for the question. I answered in the chat that the Environment Agency is supporting various cleanup actions in Norway, and the funds that are being used for cleanup actions has increased during the last 5 or 6 years, and we see increasing funds both from public sources but also from private sources like the Retailers Fund, which is quite large. And the Retailers Fund might be of interest for you because that's a fund that comes from the plastic bags. So every time we buy a plastic bags, there's a fee that goes to this fund, and this fund works to combat marine litter. So there's actually quite large funds in Norway to work on marine litter.
Okay, we're going to try something totally crazy. She will speak through my phone. She managed to call me, and I hope then you're going to hear. So, Hélène, can you speak?
Okay, I'm going to jump right in. I believe there was a previous session where they discussed information technology and connectedness in the north. Here you're seeing the problems live firsthand. So thank you, Phil, for the introduction, and thank you to my colleagues for some really interesting and informative presentations. As Phil mentioned, our research center was created over 40 years ago by Inuit for Inuit to respond to their research needs. Next slide, please. On the map, you can see in the right-hand bottom corner where Nunavik is located, and where you see the red star is Kuujjuaq, where I'm calling from this morning. So in Nunavik, in this Inuit region, country food that comes from wild animals, is still a really important part of the Inuit diet. And it's these country foods, these animals, and their living environments that we study at the research center. So I'm just going to present to you a few of the projects that we're working on these days. Next slide, please. This first program is a parasite monitoring program where we check the meat of walrus killed by hunters. We examine the meat in a food safety context to make sure that it's safe to eat before people cook it. The next project, next slide, is a new one we're putting together to examine walrus habitat. So we're looking at the effects of climate change on sea ice and the potential impacts on walrus population. In this project, we're of course going to be working closely with elders and Inuit hunters. Next slide, please. We do a lot of work on fish, as it's one of the most consumed country foods. And of course, these days, we look a lot at how climate change can impact local fisheries. Some of the things that we study are fish growth and migration, as well as fish body condition. Here again, we work closely with communities, and many of our programs have a youth training component. Next slide, please. Fisheries and mining is also a big question. There are 2 large mines in the northern part of Nunavik, and we were asked a few years ago to do a new study to see if the mines were having an impact on a local fishery. So in this study, we looked at diet, the prevalence of disease, as well as contaminant levels. I'm happy to say that our results showed that the fish were deemed healthy and safe for human consumption. A new project that we're working on, next slide please, is to examine microplastics on Nunavik shoreline and in coastal waters. So last year we worked on developing methodology, and this next coming year we're going to look into the prevalence of microplastics in our shores and waters. Next slide, please. One of our longest running programs is the Beluga population study. This is a long-term collaboration with hunters where we gather data, and this data is then used to inform policy at the political decision-making level. Next slide, please. One last study that we're just starting in collaboration with other organizations is one to look at seal health. We plan to look at parasites and contaminant levels, among other things. This project could not be done without a strong collaboration with local hunters, and there's a big component of training with youth. I'm going to keep it short and sweet there, so I'm going to say, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. And it was a pleasure listening to all of you this morning.
Thank you very much for that, Elaine, and you did a great job even with this technology problem, with this technique problem. If I may take only a really small question before closing the full session and say thanks to all the panelists, have you also started to monitor any potential red tide species along the coast? Because you're talking about security and safety, so I just want to know if you have any kind of program on that.
At the Research Center, it's not something that we're actively working on, but it's certainly something that we're keeping an eye out, and we'll keep you posted.
Thank you very much. I would just want us to wrap up the session by saying thanks to all the 5 panelists. It was really interesting, really diverse. I learned a lot. I hope all the attendees also enjoyed. Don't hesitate, all the attendees, to ask your question on the Slack section if you didn't have the time. And don't hesitate to reach the different panelists. I think everything was so interesting, then I will send mine definitely. So thank you again to everyone, and stay safe. Bye-bye.